लाइव हो रहा है हाँ टाइम दिखा रहा है टाइम दिखा रहा है लाइव यू कैन एक्चुअली अच्छा एक बार देखिए उसी लिंक पे देखिए मेरे पास नहीं है ना आप मुझे मैं भेज देती एक बार स्टार्ट हो जाए एक बार चेक करना है हाँ बेटा he wanted to check out some अरे अलियास 440 1640 440 ऐसे ही दिख रहा है 440 वही है ये ऑटो मैंने जब किया ना तो इट वेंट टुवर्ड्स 16 अच्छा जब 16 देखिए किया तो 4 हो गया था ये देखो चेक कीजिए ना आई कैन चेक हां चेक नहीं मैं यहां से बोलूंगा हेलो हेलो साउंड आ रहा है हेलो हेलो एक बार चेक कीजिए साउंड हेलो इट इज लो बट इट इज कमिंग हेलो 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 उसमें वॉल्यूम कम है ना इसलिए हाँ हाँ ठीक है लेट है थोड़ा इट्स लाइक 3-4 सेकंड लेट बट इट इज वर्किंग नहीं नो प्रॉब्लम इट इज वर्किंग still saying it's too much.
So a very warm welcome to everyone here. Today we have gathered here to celebrate the legacy, the life and legacy of Professor TKU. We are here to pay our tributes. At the same time, we also know in many ways in which Oommen, his scholarship, the way he lived his life, has touched each of us. So as you see that this notice for coming here did not have any organizers, because we believe that Oommen is owned by no one, that everyone who is here and all those who are connected with the live telecast, all those who have the admirers of his writings, those who have been his students, colleagues, etc. He belongs to everyone. And so, with that spirit in mind, we begin with inviting Mr. Salman Khurshid to come and preside the evening. As we all know, Mr. Salman Khurshid is the former Union Minister, Foreign Minister, well-known lawyer, as well as an active, politician, contributor in columns, etc. He is also, incidentally, the president of the India Islamic Cultural Centre. Thank you, sir, for accepting our request. The proceedings will, from now on, will be taken care of by the chair of the session. So with the permission of the chair, we begin with a small write-up which I have written for as we heard the news of his passing away. Professor Oommen, Professor Emeritus at JNU and a towering figure in the Indian and international sociology, left for his final journey on February 26. His funeral, joined by a host of former colleagues, close members of the family, students, members of the civil society, and the parishioners of the Jerusalem Mar Thoma Syrian Church, was marked by ceremonial solemnity. In many ways, the mood in the prayer assembly reflected the temperament that he possessed, non-combative, yet firm on his ideas, persuasive but rarely dismissive, a self-confessed pluralist who valued different streams of thoughts, patronized none, and steadfastly held on to his own. In certain terms, the passing away of Professor Oommen, following in recent past the demise of Yogendra Singh 2020, Imtiaz Ahmed 2023, JPS Oberoi 2024, Andre Bete 2026, and Professor Nayak 2026 again, symbolizes the serve to salvage Indian sociology from the abstract historicism of colonial Indology and yet remain guarded against nationalist indigenous enticement. Pursuit of knowledge for them, purpose demanded with the existing modes of thinking, dialogue across cultures and continents, and an unwavering integrity of purpose. The post-independence Indian universities, akin to the Nehruvian vision, promised accommodative spaces for liberal thought and commingling of frameworks, which in turn prompted the flourishing of a spirited and non-canonical scientific tradition. Oommen and his contemporaries contributed as much as they made the most out of these enabling conditions to bring Indian sociology its international recognition and respectability. Sorry. Their approach towards what constructed the social in the Indian context profoundly stands in contrast with the prescribed insularity and negation that current decolonial, nativist, or indigenous frameworks demand. For nearly 6 decades or more, Professor Oommen's peerless and inexorable academic pursuits stood out as an exemplar in Indian sociology and social sciences in general. As a teacher who spent more than 40 years imparting lessons in advanced sociology, he is remembered for the originality and rigor he brought into the classroom, and for the generous mentoring that he offered to young researchers and upcoming social scientists. The corpus of his writings, more than 30 widely acclaimed books and hundreds of research papers, apart from reviews, intuitive articles in newspapers and magazines, testify to his wide array of interests that range from theory, methodology, intricate questions of political sociology, debates in Indian sociology on the nature of reality, to assessing the social impact of processes such as globalization and economic development. New fields of inquiry, analysis of social movements, study of modern professions, and sociology of nationhood and nationalism opened up with his pioneering contributions. His astute interventions and analysis of policy instruments brought lucidity to otherwise thorny subjects. His contribution towards the professionalization of the discipline and his practitioners remain inimitable. He led from the front in different capacities as secretary, vice president, and later the president of the Indian Sociological Society, the foremost body of sociologists in the country. His election as the president of the International Sociological Association in 1990, first from the Global South, was by no means a small feat. As a political sociologist, Oommen was not a mute bystander to the iniquities of material and symbolic resources, asymmetries of power and patronage, and inaccessibility of justice to those on the margins. His non-conformism was pronounced in the subjects that he chose to intervene, in his theoretical standpoint, in his penetrating observations and subversion of presiding concepts and philosophies for their obscured reality. In advancing his position, he was unsparing, prepared to throw hands with fellow sociologists, but was never to be found wanting on rigor, precision, and objectivity. Amidst the clamor for indigenizing sociology, a raging debate in the 1970s, Oommen was skeptical. The call led by Liu Dumo, later Machiavelli, to locate the sources of Indian sociology, Indology, primarily the Sanskrit texts, failed to impress him. Uh, in the wake of United Nations World Summit Against Racism, Oommen departed from his contemporaries whose insistence on the separation between race, a social construct, and caste, a social construct, and race bearing biological features, he found puerile. He persuasively argued how race, despite its biological connotation, had acquired linguistic, cultural, and national characteristics, resulting in the origins of political ideologies such as Nazism and fascism. Likewise, the Hindu caste order embodied racial undertones as its origins is often traced to the Varna scheme, he reminded. We are indebted to Professor Oommen for having brought clarity in our writing and thinking, for having taught some of the life lessons, professional integrity, scientific rigor, unwavering self-discipline, and social commitment. We celebrate his life and legacy today and for eternity. I would invite Mr. Salman Khurshid for his presiding remarks, and then we will continue with the slides.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am here as a sense of obligation, not because I happen to head this institution, but because I'm here, I believe I have an obligation of a social kind. I'm here to pay tribute to one of the greatest sociologists that our country has had, whose understanding of Indian society and contribution to our imagination for the India of the future has been quite remarkable. Professor Oommen's students are innumerable, and each one has a greater tale to tell, a greater story to tell than I could ever be able to master. And I feel deprived that I didn't have the privilege to know him within the precincts of his own comfortable university, his own Jawaharlal Nehru University. But he transited to a much larger world, and I believe at a very critical moment his contribution to what was a far-sighted sense of discovery for Indian society when he joined the team that gave the Searcher Committee report. It was in many ways a path-breaking report. Its intentions were different from whatever had been attempted in the past. It was the discovery of the truth. It was reimagining India in a manner which provided greater sense of justice to ordinary people. And certainly I think it's been seen and often flagged as something relating to an important commitment to minorities of our country. It wasn't just simply a commitment to minorities of the country, but it was, I believe, if it's seen carefully, a greater methodology of integrating the minority with the majority, with the adhesive of shared justice and the shared destiny. And I think in that, contributing the sociological model of such a committee report, very clearly it's writ large that the contribution of many very significant intellectuals, but a major contribution of Professor Oommen. And I felt that when you people gather here, many of you have known him personally, have admired him at very close quarters. I felt that it was important that I be present when you gather to celebrate his memory and pay tribute to him, that I should be present. I must though apologize that because of a very full day today, I will be with you till 5:30. Certainly be able to gather a great deal between now and 5:30, but you will excuse me as I quietly slip away at 5:30. to keep my promise somewhere else. Thank you very much for coming here and adding to the flavor of intellectual discourse in the India Islamic Cultural Centre. It's been our very deep endeavor to ensure that we move from being known only for good food and being known only for theatre and drama, but that we also be known for true intellectual exchanges about things that matter to us in our society. And I believe in that endeavor and that process, to stand here and acknowledge the great work of Professor K.T. Oommen and to pay tribute to him is integral to what we are trying to do, and hopefully it'll add a lot of energy to what we are trying to do. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. And may I invite, the way we have a long list of speakers. So what we thought of following is that we'll invite first set of speakers to the dais, and after that, then we will, invite the next set. So please, Professor Virginius Xaxa, former professor, Department of Sociology, University of Delhi. He has worn many hats, but I think those in Delhi would be fondly remembering him more for his association with Delhi School of Economics. Professor Xaxa. Professor Prabhat Patnaik, former colleague of Professor Oommen, although in separate centers. Professor of Economics at JNU, retired Professor of Economics at JNU. Professor Zoya Hasan, again one of the colleagues, and who also, I think, shared, professional life with Professor Oommen. She's a former professor of political studies, Center for Political Studies at JNU, and emeritus professor actually now. And may I also invite Mr. A.J. Philip, journalist, former editor of Tribune. Please come to the dais. We'll go by the order. We'll ask Professor Virginius Xaxa to come and speak.
Can we have a 1 minute silence?
Okay, is it?
Last night. Towards the end. Towards the end. Towards the end.
Okay, sir.
Well, thank you, Tanvir, for the invitation, and I'm happy to be part of this program. I haven't been formally associated with Professor Oommen, nor I have at any point of time one-to-one interactions with him. Much of the time that I have interacted with him during the conference or workshops, where whenever he delivered the lecture. And therefore, I didn't have that kind of privilege of knowing him. But I was acquainted with his name when I was doing my postgraduate at Pune University. We had a paper. If you really look at the Pune University syllabus on those days, it was very Americanized. There was very little of India except, I remember, Hindu social institutions and what is called the rural, urban and tribal social structure. And it was in the rural tribal structure that we found that those days this whole debate or rural-urban continuum. And in that reading, in that subject or topic, there was a reading of Professor TKU, which was basically a critique of rural-urban continuum. And he's trying to say as to how this whole continuum, in fact, in the context of India, is a problematic. But most importantly, he brings out something very important, that when you're trying to understand this whole social transformation, the core of each society is, core institutional feature of each society is almost obscured. And I think it's very important if you really want to understand the transition from rural to urban. I think that was, I thought, was one of the, and I think we were all fascinated with this, and I think friends of us at Cyclostyle did, and we had really kept that article. So then I came to know him when I began my PhD at IIT Kanpur, Professor Nonghri, and I was working on the agrarian social structure. And that is when again I got associated with the writings of Professor TKU, particularly what's called Udaan movement, then his mobilizations, institutionalizations, and so on and so forth. And I found that, again, he was very interested in the sense that on those days, 70s, there's a whole big debate between mode of productions and the middle peasant thesis. And he realized that to take a woman, in fact, again, tried to engage with the whole idea of the middle peasant thesis that was there. And unlike others who were primarily talking in terms of class, he introduced the concept of what he called the caste, class, and state. That, again, you find is a very interesting idea in terms of which you are looking at the middle class. So you can't really talk of middle class as such, but you have to really introduce the caste dimensions and also the political ideology that one. So that, I think, is interesting. I was not aware of it that he was a product of Pune University, of which I was as well. And it's only much later that I came to know of him. But in the course of my interactions, though, as I said, not personal, but I think through writing of his works, I learned a great deal, both in the context of when I was doing the agrarian studies during my PhD, and later on when I began to move to the studies of tribal questions in India. And what really I found interesting about him is that many of these concepts and categories that we generally use from the West was very critical, and you're trying to see as to what extent those categories are actually can be thought about in the context of the South Asian reality. So that has been there, and therefore what I would like to say is that although not a formal student, not a formal interactions or colleagues, I have, if there is anyone other than other person who really passed away very recently, I think the two people who have influenced me greatly is Andre Bethe and TKU. The canvas of their writings and canvas of the way in which they think and the way they have reflected, it has immensely influenced my life, my academic journey. And I owe a great deal surely to Professor Andre Bethe and TKU. And I feel that something even more fascinating about TKU is that someone who acknowledges the people who really come from the margins of the society. And I was quite surprised when there was this seminar as a part of the, what's called International Book Fair in Germany. And he was, what's called, worked out a team of those who would be along with him, for Germans and for Indians. It was, I think, Vipin Chandra was the chairman of the National Book Trust, and I think that was organized. And I was a part of it, and that book, that's the first time I really spent a more durable time with TKU, and that book really came on the classes, citizenship and inequality. So I think what I find, what I would like to say is that his academic engagement, but more so even his personality, the way in which try to influence, persuade the young people, understand them, and looking at the whole society from the lens of the marginality. That I thought was one of the most amazing things that I have really learned from him. And I think most of the young students are tremendously influenced because of the kind of lens, that perspective that he had. So this is what I have to say, and I would like to recommend that to him, because I think he has also influenced me greatly, though it is not consciously but unconsciously, in terms of the way in which I have borrowed many of his ideas and tried to work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khaka. Professor Khaka mentioned Professor Oommen's questioning of the middle present thesis and bringing in the caste question. Interestingly, that work was Professor Oommen dedicated that work to Ayyankali, the Dalit revolutionary or 19th century Dalit revolutionary of Kerala, which explains his politics, although it was always subdued. We invite Professor Prabhat Patnaik, Professor of Economics. Please come share your views.
Thank you very much. When my wife Utsa and I came back to India in 1973 to join JNU, the School of Social Sciences, which we joined, was of course the real kind of center of the university. That school had, at that time, 4 major centers or departments. One, of course, was the History Center, which was the real piece de resistance. And in that, you had outstanding professors like S. Gopal, Romila Thapar, Bipin Chandra, Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, N. Panikar, and others. The other major centers were, of course, sociology, political science, and regional development, which mainly dealt with issues relating to geography. Sociology Center basically had 2 big professors. One was Professor Yogendra Singh, who had come from Lucknow, and the other was Professor TKU. Professor Oommen, in fact, was a major contributor to the intellectual ferment which characterized JNU of those days. There was massive discussion on all kinds of issues, and of course he was a major contributor to it, because also he was somewhat iconoclastic in his attitude towards issues. He did not really take straightforward kind of positions like others did, but he always had his own take on issues, and so he really stimulated a lot of discussion. We lived on the same campus, originally in the old campus, subsequently we moved to the new campus. He used to go for evening walks, and on some of these walks I would actually join him. And during those walks we would have lots of discussions. Particularly he would tell me a lot about Kerala society, from which I learned a great deal, and what is more, subsequently when I worked in Kerala for about 5 years in the planning board, that was of great help to me. But of course, among the many things which I learned from him, there is one thing which I had to unlearn, and that is because he once told me during one of the walks that we were having that, that the time that K.R. Doriyamma, the well-known Kerala communist leader, had been passed over for the chief ministership of the state. So he told me that Kerala would never elect a person belonging to the Iduva community as the chief minister of the state. At that time, it was in fact quite true. But of course, the state moved on from there, and subsequently you have had several Iduva chief ministers, including the current one. And Professor Oommen would have been the very first person to acknowledge it, to acknowledge the fact that he was wrong at that time, and to have been happy about the fact that he had been wrong at that time. He was, of course, outstanding as a sociologist, which was manifest in the fact that he became the president of the International Sociological Association, I'm told the first from Asia, not just from India. And later on, when we all retired, we moved to a place where we actually lived cheek by jowl with one another, the National Media Centre, where he was actually elected the president of the Residents Association. He had enormous amount of organizational ability, and of course he was widely respected for his wisdom and for his civility, quite apart from his intellectual depth and of course his meticulous attention to detail, which was manifest in the Sachar Committee report, for instance, for which he did a great deal of the supervised a great deal of the statistical empirical work. So altogether, with Professor Oomen's passing, there is a huge void which is left in the intellectual life of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts. We invite Professor Zoya Hasan to come and share her views.
Thank you for this opportunity to say a few words about Professor TKU Oomen, whom many of us admired both for his scholarship and his conviviality. He was one of the stalwarts of Jawaharlal Nehru University, an outstanding sociologist, and as Prabhat just said, a very influential presence in the School of Social Sciences for many decades. Now, through his wide-ranging scholarship on social movements, national identity, citizenship, ethnicity, pluralism, and above all, social justice, he helped shape some of the most important debates in Indian society, in Indian sociology, and, of course, within JNU. His work on the relationship between state and ethnicity was particularly important, as Professor Khaka just mentioned, particularly his analysis of communal violence and ethnic conflict in India. And that offered an important framework for thinking about identity, security, and belonging in a deeply diverse society like ours. I think what was striking about Professor Oomen's work was the way it drew our attention to the everyday anxieties and aspirations of ordinary people, as well as, very importantly, to the questions of exclusion, recognition, and identity. At a time when many societies around the world are drawn to the ideas of sameness, uniformity, homogeneity, he reminded us of the importance of pluralism and the challenge of reconciling it with equality in a democratic society. I think that was really his signal contribution, was the attempt to combine recognition and equality. Professor Oomen often emphasized the idea that a nation is not merely a political structure, but a felt community, where the intensity of people's attachment depends on the degree of social integration. In societies marked by diversity, however, the sense of unity can be strained when cultural and social differences translate into inequality or hierarchical perceptions about groups, for example, about immigrants and so on. So nation building, according to him, therefore depends not on eliminating diversity, but on accommodating it while fostering both recognition and equity. This demands policies that enable marginalized groups to participate on an equal footing within the broader national communities. And thus, I think in many of his writings, he promoted, for example, the ideas of federalism, multicultural citizenship, and inclusive policies, which are essential for sustaining nation building. Now, both Salman Khurshid and Prabhat have mentioned that Professor Oomen was also closely associated with the Sachar Committee report, which challenged the widely circulated myth of Muslim appeasement. As an important member of the committee, perhaps one of its most important members, he made a significant contribution. I think he made a rather remarkable contribution to that landmark report. It showed that Muslims lagged behind most other communities, barring the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and in some cases, even behind the scheduled castes on every socio-economic indicator. I believe the report's deep sociological insights, that is the Sachar Committee report's deep sociological insights, owed much to Professor Oomen's intellectual influence. I remember many animated discussions with him when he was a member of this committee and on various aspects of the Sachar committee, and I had the privilege of attending a few of the subgroup meetings of this committee at his invitation. So in the end then, Professor Oommen remained deeply committed to the idea of a plural, secular and equal society, a commitment I think that was both humane and unwavering. And conversations with him, and I had many conversations with him in the School of Social Sciences, with him were always very engaging, very interesting, quite stimulating, and above all, these conversations were always enlivened by his great sense of humor, a rather gentle and wonderful sense of humor. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would say that when such a committee is being mentioned so many times, I had the opportunity to work very closely with him in the Sachar committee. And as you would know that in every committee, there could be debates in terms of, conflict of ideas, thought, etc. And in those debates, Professor Oommen's intervention was always extremely important. We as researchers drew a lot of strength from that, particularly when we were trying to argue along certain lines. And we found immense support from Oommen and other members as well. On the question of, as I could notice that Professor Oommen was not only interested in understanding the question of marginality, but would go deep into it to actually see as to who are those who are really on the margin in that sense. So when the debate was there within the committee as well, some of you might be aware about Muslim reservation, etc. Oommen was, along with data, etc., which we provided to him, was steadfastly on this question that we have to ensure that the Muslim OBC is taken care of, is attended to in that debate. And we invite Mr. A.J. Philip, former editor of Tribune, and Mr. Philip wrote a very moving tribute immediately after his demise. I read it and I thought he should be here. Thank you, sir.
Chairman, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy that I have been writing a lot of obituaries. First time my obituary got recognition here. Thank you. Yeah, Professor Oommen was a friend of mine. I know him because his elder brother, Mr. TK Matthew, was one of the founders of Deepalaya, an NGO in Delhi. And I was the president of Deepalaya for 18 years when Mr. TK Matthew was the secretary and chief executive. And as I mentioned this, so it was in that context I used to meet Professor TK Oommen. I'm not a sociology student, I'm a journalist basically. And I was greatly influenced by Professor Oommen. One day, he asked me about a particular article that I wrote in the Indian Express. Then I told him that I got a lot of response. So he asked me, what do you mean by a lot of response? I said, I got a lot of response. Then he asked me specifically, in terms of letters you got? I said, yeah, 1 or 2 letters. Then how many people complimented you? I tried to remember, maybe 2 or 3 calls I got. So you made it a lot. So this is what he thought. And Mr. TK Oommen was like that. He has, in his autobiography, he has mentioned that when he got Padma Bhushan, he was felicitated at 11 functions. And not only that, he also mentions that he got 193 letters from various people, including Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer. That is what he has written. So he was meticulous about certain things. Yeah. And it was very tough dealing with him. So I felt sorry that I had to say that I did not get much response. Anyway. Now, about Sachar Committee report, it has often been mentioned And I know the contributions that he gave to the Sachar Committee report. And I always consider the Sachar Committee report as the Magna Carta of the minorities. That is how I always treated it. Because that is the kind of, it was a weapon with which, the whole idea that Muslims were being appeased, they were getting a larger share of the national resources, that was demolished by this particular report. And he was also a very honest person, Professor TKU Oommen. When he got this award, this Padma Bhushan award, I called him. And I, of course, congratulated him. And then because I am friendly with him, I asked him, how did you manage it? So he was very honest in telling me. Usually, people won't say that. People would say, oh, I got it, because I'm so great that I got it. This is what people would expect. But Professor Oommen told me that actually the credit should go to the Vice President, Mr. Hamid Ansari, because it was Mr. Hamid Ansari who recommended his case and took it up with the, I don't know who the authorities concerned, and he got the award. So that is how he put it. That is how we put it. And now, Mr. Bhattacharya has, sorry, Mr. Bhattacharya? No. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Patnaik. Professor Patnaik, I know him. Sorry. Professor Patnaik mentioned about Professor Oommen making a comment about Eedavas. What he perhaps meant was that the Marxist Party will never make a Eedava woman as the chief minister. They have not done so far. K.K. Shailaja was overlooked last time. So Professor Oommen, and I do not know how many of you know, Professor Oommen, as I said, he is very meticulous. He has in his book written that he wrote 56 articles in newspapers. And out of the 56 articles, 26 were in the Times of India. He has mentioned it. And why I mention it is because he wrote that 26, as I said, 26 articles appeared in the Times of India. So many people thought that, he was a Times of India person. During those days, Times of India had a journalism school. There was a school of journalism in the Times of India. And this journalism school was headed by a person called Thomas K. Oommen. His name was Thomas K. Oommen, and this man's name is TK Oommen. So at that time there was one Mr. Upendra Bajpayee. Mr. Upendra Bajpayee was looking for members to join his media center in Gurgaon. So he was looking for people to join this media center. It was a group housing society. They were looking for people. So one day, Professor Oommen got a call from Mr. Bajpayee saying, are you Mr. Oommen? He said, yes, I am Oommen. Would you like to join a housing society? Where? In Gurgaon. And he did not, of course, he had accommodation in JNU, but he did not have a house of his own. So he said, yes, why not? And then later on, Mr. Upendra Bajpayee came to know that he is not the right person, but then he had given a commitment and he had to be taken. That is how Professor Oommen became a member of Media Center in Gurgaon, where he lived for a long time and where he also died. So that house came to him because of a mistaken identity. And Professor Oommen was also known for his great sense of humor. For his great sense of humor. Some of you who know him, would be knowing it. What had happened was once, he took some decision. The students were not happy with this decision. The hostel, those who were staying in the hostel, they protested. And at night, around 11 o'clock, they came to his house and they shouted a slogan, Oommen Murdabad. Oommen Murdabad or Oommen Saab Murdabad, something like that, they shouted. So he was woken up, he opened the door and he found some students protesting at night. Then he told them, मैं कल मुरादाबाद जाऊंगा, आज रात सोने के लिए time दे दीजिए. So that was how he got away with it. The students laughed and they went away. And I also have his wife, Mrs. Josephine Oommen, was principal of a school, of which I was the secretary. I was the chief, or you can say the manager of the school. So I know her very well. So there is a story about her. It is not a secret. And the story is that Professor Oommen got a job, not a job, an assignment in Hungary. It is a 9-month assignment. So he thought of taking his wife along because he would be there for 9 months. So she also accompanied him. And it was perhaps the longest stay abroad. So his wife was very thrilled. So she packed all her nice saris, all the nice saris she had, all the Kanjipuram saris, etc. she collected and she carried to Budapest. What happened was when they reached Budapest, this suitcase was missing. And she never got it back. She lost forever. So she was very sad. She was virtually crying. And sense of humor did not, his sense of humor came to his rescue. And he said, don't worry, write a series of articles, people will read and we will get the money. And I can give you the headline. Indian lady arrives in Budapest without clothes. Everybody will read it. This was, Professor Oommen was like that. Professor Oommen was like that. And I will conclude, before I conclude, I will tell you one more story about him. I belong to the same church that he belongs to, Marthama Church. Once our church invited him for a program that was to encourage students who are appearing for the exam, basically to encourage them to do well in the exam. So he started his speech. He said, you all should be like dogs. So everybody was stunned. A professor, JNU professor, coming and telling the students that they should be like dogs. They were shocked. Then later on he said, one great quality of a dog is that dog's job is to secure the house. So it doesn't sleep much, but even when he sleeps, he is conscious about his duty. So if there is a slight, disturbance, he will get up. So students should also be like that. You should study, you should concentrate on your studies like the dog which is obsessed with its work. So this is what he said, and everybody liked that speech. And I have already taken a lot of time. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for reminding us of the lighter side of Professor Oommen. We'll thank the speakers of this session. Some of you might be leaving because they have other commitments. And then we invite Professor Aditya Mukherjee.
Will you play the video?
Oh yeah, let me just check. Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri.
But they can see the video.
Sure.
Okay. Should we play one or two?
Yeah, we should play.
Okay. Sorry. So we have some video messages.
Yeah.
So we'll play it here. A couple of video messages, and then we'll invite everybody.
This is a moment of sadness for all of us. Professor TKU was mentor to many of us here. He was a teacher of great reputation and a sociologist of great impact. I had the privilege of being a student in actual days, 1972-74, and then I got the rare opportunity of becoming his colleague from 1990 years ago. I have seen him teaching, I have seen him leading, I have seen him patronizing and guiding. In my own personal life, He made great impact. But that's for some other occasion to describe. His going away has created a personal vacuum, but his work will stand in among us all the time. Because he was always very concerned about the need to conceptualize social realities around us. He was second to none, feeling the pulse of the people. He was also not shying away from making policy inputs as and when demanded. I am very thankful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to join all of you in paying my respect. And I join all of you in carrying on the work. Remain incomplete. It's work on citizenship, it's work on democracy, it's work on nation building, it's work on social justice, and it's work on globalization. Many tasks are before us. Let us go ahead and be guided by the memory of Professor TKU. This is a moment of sad.
I thank Professor Patnaik for this opportunity to pay my tribute to Professor TKU. Professor TKU has taught me at MA and later on was my student.
So for everyone would know that the previous person was Professor Anand Kumar, and we are sorry, he is a public person, so he decided to record it in public. We actually had to edit 3 or 4 people who were sitting around him. We could not edit out the surrounding noise. Yeah. So, this is Professor N. Rajaram, who was also a student of Professor Oommen. He retired as a Dean of Social Sciences, Central University of Gujarat.
And for the East is passing a great big flood of thoughts about him. Professor Oommen used to encourage his students to be critical of the hegemonic and the dominant explanations that were prevalent in India history. He himself was critical of this Sanskritic text to be used as a way to understand Indian society as a whole. He used to say this would lead to Indian sociology becoming Hindu sociology, and this would lead to a theoretical blackout of those other than the class movement, like the Dalits, Adivasis, religious communities like Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others. Professor Oommen felt that a better way to understand Indian reality was to adopt perspective from him. He was very inclusive, and he personally used to study different cultures in different locations. Offhand, I can recollect. He studied Rajasthan, Kerala, Delhi, and even Gujarat. He was critical of academic parochialism. Professor Oommen was an institutional builder. Many of you would recollect that he was the Secretary General of the World Congress of Sociology, which was held in Delhi in 1986. At the end of the Congress, he found there was a sizable sum of money to the tune of rupees 10 lakhs. This money grew by the end of the 1990s and was used to buy a property for the Indian Sociological Society, which gave it an anchor. I conclude by praying that he rests in peace.
We have one message from Professor Ajit Pathak, who could not attend this memorial meeting as he is away from Delhi. I will invite Navanipa Bhattacharya, Professor of Sociology at Venkateshwar College. She will read the message.
So, Professor Pathak sent this message, and I'll just read it out on his behalf. So he writes, I cannot imagine my university days without the extraordinary energy with which Professor TKU used to enchant us. Yes, he was a great scholar, a lifelong researcher, and widely known for his books and essays. But then he was also one of those who could play with both rigorous research and passionate teaching. And above all, he loved the Center for the Study of Social Systems and contributed immensely to the development of this center as a creative and vibrant site of engaged pedagogy and meaningful research. There was something magical about him. I recall his passion, his argumentative style, his sense of humor, his inner discipline, and above all, his vision of India, which was qualitatively different from the prevalent majoritarian hyper-nationalism. In a way, he was irresistible. We are living in difficult times as the market-driven neoliberal instrumental logic invades the realm of education. We are witnessing the devaluation of humanities and social sciences and the growing erosion of critical thinking, or the very spirit of a liberal university. The question is, for how long can a university like JNU resist this onslaught, retain its uniqueness as a liberal, inclusive, affordable public university, and nurture socially awakened, intellectually vibrant, and politically sensitive sociologists, historians, political theorists, and economists? A real tribute to Professor Oommen by the teachers and students of the CSSS, I believe, should mean that they dare to accept his challenge, retain the original spirit of JNU, appreciate the beauty of diversities, differences, and pluralism, and resist what seems to have become the new normal in our times. The commodification of education and associated politics of ranking, branding, and networking, the reduction of the value of knowledge into pure metrics, and the transformation of a student from a seeker of truth to a depoliticized, atomized consumer. Thank you.
So, as a chair of this session, I will invite Professor Tiplut Nonghri, former professor of sociology at CSSS JNU, to please come to the dais. The speakers in this session, Professor Aditya Mukherjee, Professor of History, CHS JNU. Sir, please.
What do I have to do? Just sit there, and then you can speak at the end.
Okay. Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri and Professor Susan Visvanathan. Both of them were students as well as colleagues of Professor Oommen for a long time. So, okay. So it's a whole JNU. Professor Jodhka, please come to the dais. So we'll go by the order. We'll ask Professor Aditya Mukherjee to come and share his views.
Thank you, Tanveer, for inviting me to talk about a person who I've known for a very long time. This has been a very bad year, not only because of what the RSS and Mr. Modi is doing to the country and what Mr. Trump is doing to the world, but JNU lost a number of its stalwarts in the last few months. Professor Sivasami, Professor Datta, Kasturi Datta, Professor Panikkar, and then Professor Oommen were all lost in the last few months. Professor Oommen joined JNU in 1971 when the teaching program in JNU started. I'm just saying this just to remind you that he's as old as the university itself. The first MPhil batch came in 71. And I joined as a student in 72, the first MA batch. So we've had a long association from the 70s till he passed away really over the years. So it was an association which was filled with, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, with a lot of argument, debate, humor, and things like that. One of the things that one remembers, I won't take very much time, there are others who know much more about Professor Oommen's work, but except just mention a few things about him which struck us was, and that is what built the JNU atmosphere over time. What struck you about him was, to us at least, that he's completely non-hierarchical nature. And he's willing to speak to anybody, welcome anybody across the board, whatever be their discipline or age or whatever. I know that this is not the feeling often of the students who sat in his class, who remember him as a very stern person, but certainly in our walks and wherever we met, that sternness never appeared. He was totally accessible to the students, and he was totally non-hierarchical. Two things that are, as you know, fast disappearing, unfortunately, from the campus. And though JNU is struggling very hard to keep it. I've had several occasions to discuss formally and informally with Professor Oommen, and one occasion I remember is when we went as far as Sonada in Darjeeling, and he was in his 80s and as sprightly as ever, embarrassing much younger people like us with his energy. And we would discuss and debate issues that concerned the country, on which we had several differences, I would say, but without any rancor. One of the issues that got naturally discussed, and an issue on which he wrote and thought a lot about the nature of a nation state and what constitutes a nationality, and issues like that, on which we had differences. We as historians had a different understanding of what constitutes a nation and a nation state and what he understood. I'm not getting into that. But we were able to debate that with complete equality in a sense. And despite the fact that he was so much senior to all of us, but he never held his position and his seniority on his sleeves and, tried to dominate you. That was never the personality that he had. What we had in common with Professor Oommen was the objective that we had in mind, whether across the disciplines in JNU at that time, that what our nation state should be, that it should be secular, it should not be based on any one identity, whether it be region, language, ethnicity, or religion. We were agreed on that, and Professor Oommen worked in that direction, as we all know. His work on Hindu-Muslim unity, his work for equity was very well known. And again, an area, as we are aware, that we are very rapidly losing in this country. Both the culture of debate, which has virtually disappeared in our country. If you happen to belong to a religion, and if you happen to be a student of JNU, and if you happen to be independent thinking, you remain in jail for 5 years. That is Omar Khalid, my student. So, we've come a long way from what our teachers and our contemporaries in JNU tried to build in this country, and in an institution which was independent, free thinking, and democratic, secular, equitous, has taken a big hit. In such a situation,
the passing away of people like Professor Oommen is a big, very big loss, not only to the university, but to our country. I pay my tribute to him. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we now invite Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri to come and share.
Thank you, Tanvir. Thank you to the organizers for calling me. Like many other speakers before me, I'm not a direct student of Professor Oommen. And when we were young and we were just discussing with Susan, who was my class friend, we were very scared of him. And we kept our distance. And even when I joined as a colleague, I would sort of think many times before I would knock the door. And if I didn't hear, come in, I wouldn't dare open the door and go in, you know. So there was a sense of fear, sense of distance. What we were struck by is the care he took for his classes, who would come completely prepared, very well structured. We had different styles in our center, equally attractive. And when we were young, we didn't find the structuring too attractive. And as I grow older, I find that increasingly I say firstly, secondly, thirdly, and I have many points because it helps you to put your ideas and your thoughts in control. When we were younger, we were, and here Abhijit is not here, we would often say, and he in particular would be extremely wary of the little slips which would be put up on the door of the faculty. He was very particular about the tutorials. As students, the tutorial timings were very important, whatever it would be, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, and it would be 2:30 to 3:45 or, you know, things like that. And Abhijit would say, but why does he want it quite like this? 2:30, you've just had lunch. I mean, do we have to go back now? But the point is, you realize, I give these examples because he thought things through. He thought things through, and he had it's not that he just wrote on professions, but he lived a life dictated by certain rules, procedures, norms. He just didn't say it, he practiced it, you know. And the other thing, because like I said, I didn't even think ever of approaching him as a supervisor. There were these three big people in our departments. I stayed clear of them. But it's the point that he noticed you, which I discovered many, many years later. And when I joined as a colleague, and it was very intimidating to sit with people like him in the faculty meeting. And years went by, and I didn't seem to be doing too much writing. And he would say, "Why don't you write? You should sit and write. You should write. You should publish." And I would tell him, "But I have nothing to publish. I have no idea to publish. No reason to write. You know, I mean, I can't think of anything that I have to write." And he didn't say that's absurd. He kept quiet, and he said, "That's called a fallow period." And so I sort of took that seriously, and I've often thought of, and I find myself repeating to my students that this is fallow period. I mean, things will come, you keep reading, you keep writing, you keep doing what you have to do. And it was interesting when you're talking about Professor Mukherjee mentioned about questions of nation, state, nationality. And I personally, not because of being historian, even as a sociologist, I'm not too comfortable with the definition questions of what constitutes a nation, you know. But the point is that in the discipline of sociology, who did you have writing on state, citizenship, civil society, nationalism, nationality, questions of international order, globalization? So in a certain sense, he sort of created spaces. And if you look at comparative writings on sociology across the globe, these are things on which people write today. But it was something which was missing. Social movements, I mean, understood in a particular kind of fashion. But to go back to more smaller details of our encounter. I've already told you about the distance that at that point, he was, if you must remember, at that point we had just joined in MA, and he was probably barely 40 or early 40s, so he must have had to put in a lot of, to give that sense of gravitas, and which kept people like us in some distance. But one thing I remembered very carefully, we already had Mr. Phillips talking about going to Muradabad the next day, that this was one late night, Rajni may be remembering, there was a water shortage, or may not be remembering. We all marched to his house, banging on empty buckets because there was no water. And we were wondering what will happen next, and he appears on the terrace of his house with a pipe and dressing down. And the first thing was there was an instant silence because the image was so film-like, the evocation of him standing, people shouting there, and he's standing and looking at people down there, like, what do these people say, He used to smoke a pipe at that time, yeah, it was always there. And then the interesting thing is that he would have this aura of authority, but he was essentially democratic. It took a little bit of time for me to realize that, because he would be talking to you, he would be listening to you, he wanted to know, what was happening around. He had a genuine interest. The other thing which I think many of people have talked about is his institutional building. And I'm so glad that Professor Rajaram mentioned that we wouldn't have had the office that we have, the Indian Sociological Society, had he not got the money, invested in the money. And now that my term is over, I have to say that he would call me up and say that you're very selfish, you better stand up for the presidentship of the Indian Sociological Society. You have time, you've retired, what are you doing, And finally, the tragedy for me was that when the elections got over, he had his first stroke. And I wanted to share the news with him. So I called up his mobile phone, and his daughter-in-law picked up and said, Daddy's had a stroke, he's in the ICU, but he wants to know what happened. Okay, I mean, that kind of engagement. I was just talking to Geetha when I was coming, and culturally we are taught we should disengage as the years go by. Well, he was no one to disengage. He was in the middle of it all. And so I said, sir, I just wanted to tell you that I won. Good. But like Mr. Phillips said, by how many votes? So I don't even remember very clearly. So I said, and then he was not impressed. He said, shame on you. So that sort of firmly put me in place. I sort of tried to keep up a lot about institution building. And unfortunately, the only 2 times I met him after the stroke were not happy times. I was not happy with the kind of vulnerability from the time that he was standing on top of the terrace to this person who didn't want to be like that. So I wrote a long letter to him saying what we were trying to do from research committees, thematic lectures, archives, and they read it out to him because he would like to have a sense of what did you promise, what did you do? And I think that is something incredible. He was not very sympathetic to people if you just taught, if you just wrote, and if you didn't do a little more than that. So his public commitment, he didn't use words like public sociology, but he was. I mean, they all were. We were just talking about the others who have left us, like Professor Betty or Professor Oommen. They had a role in playing, in bringing the university and society together, however you understand that relationship. There was a deep commitment, and they thought through ideas. The other thing that struck one, as I thought of him the last many days, is like a good scholar and an academic, he grew over the years. So from the time when I first heard him lecturing, to the time when I heard him as a colleague and after, there was continuous growth in the way he articulated, in the themes that he chose, in the topics that he engaged with, And I think I liked Tanveer's question that it was it was not overt, his politics. But I think in certain senses he was, because he wrote about it, wrote about a university where the other centers of the School of Social Sciences were broadly left-wing, informed of a Marxist perspective, and sociology wasn't. In the 1970s, that's a story I would tell quite differently. I was an outlier in that center, in that sense of the term. But I also, as the years went by, understood, and particularly in the current context, why institutions have to be carefully nurtured, why plural ideas have to be engaged with, diverse views to be encouraged, teaching to be taken seriously. And the point that I learned from him, and I think JNU gave us this opportunity, and I know many of my younger colleagues over here don't get that opportunity, that we had time. We had time to teach, and we had time to think, and we had time to write. So we were, in a certain sense, privileged to institution builders like him and others who created the conditions to make that possible, and that our research fed into our teaching, and our teaching fed into our research. And he taught these things deeply about questions of ideology, questions of politics, but like I said, the language he expressed it could be different. There are many more, everybody knows about his sense of humor, and we were a little scared about it because you never knew where it was coming from and what would happen to you next. But a person extraordinarily warm, affectionate, and loving, contrary to my first impression of that person standing on the terrace with the pipe, looking down upon us, So I am really, really happy to be here, and I know that he lives on not just because of his writings, but because he has shaped institutions which will be carrying on those legacies, even if muted at this point of time. Thank you.
Professor Susan Viswanathan.
So I've always been contradictory and against the tide. That's my true nature. So I'm reminded of Ramana Maharishi, who, when his mother died, he clapped his hands and danced and said, "She has been liberated," and everybody was very shocked. So in some senses, the theological assumption that someone who has led such a long life, 88 years, and has been with us and has always communicated that sense of the wonder of things. So I think that's what I enjoyed most about Professor Oommen. As Maitrayee pointed out, we were very much in awe of him when we were 20 years old. We thought he was a very old man. At 20, we really thought 40 was very old, 45 was ancient. So when I met Jeet Singh and he was 45, he had grey hair, we thought he was very ancient. So obviously my attitude to life cycle and age sets has changed a lot. And I do not think the same way, because now I'm closer to 70 than I ever was. So I would like to say that what he communicated was this love for Durkheimian sociology as much as for Weber, as much as for Marx. And he was able to do this in a flawless way. So we listened hypnotized. We watched, we didn't even take notes. And yet, though we never asked a question, he didn't even know us by name personally, really. There were 25 of us. He came to class, he gave his lecture, and then he left. So it was a podium presence. But what he taught us was how to think. So I spent my entire semester thinking about what about the individual, what happens to the individual, because his statistical sense of reality was from Durkheim's book on suicide. So for him that was very, very important in terms of how these statistics were made available by the governments of those countries. For him, his sensibility was really in terms of numbers. And even as late as, I would say, 2021, he gave a lecture before COVID to our students, where he said, how can the individual change society? I mean, he was a Weberian, but he was curious about how can you insert the individual back. And I was quite shocked, because I had spent all my 20s the years when one's writing one's thesis, thinking about the place of the individual in the statistic. And that is what made me a sociologist. And I think that trauma that he felt about M.N. Srinivas asking him to work on the Syrian Christians probably carried over into our relationship. Because I wrote a thesis on the Syrian Christians, I went to Delhi school to do that, because I had worked with 18 case studies during my BA years, 3 years, and 18 case studies read from cover to cover. That was a syllabus. So I think for him, the animosity, the tension, perhaps the vulnerabilities of how we look at our disciplines, because both of us were workaholics, so questions of that workaholism was total. So the questions that we raise about the past or about the present, I feel has presence very much. In the Jacobite tradition, of which I'm not a member, they say the spirit roams for 40 days, visiting friends, visiting family, communicating that the spirit is quick, as Jesus said. So there is a distinction between the dead and the quick. I think Professor Oommen will always be quick. So in some senses, the laughter, the sensibilities, the ways in which he communicated to us, that each of us was important to him. And Maitrayee has said that very, very clearly. So I was astounded when I was 45 years old, trying to get my professorship. As women, we stayed in the department as keepers of house and home. The men traveled, the men were continually on the move. The women had to be there in order to make sure the institution was stable. And at the age of 46, he's asking me, would you consider yourself a sociologist of religion? And I was really deeply shocked. So then I thought, this is the man who wrote the Review of Christians of Kerala, and that happened because his neighbor was the editor of the book review. So for 18 years I had not met Professor Oommen, and when I did go back in 97 as a teacher, my instinct was something that perhaps I can refer to as a transcendent love. I didn't know the man, I didn't have an interaction with him, I didn't really communicate what he meant to me as a teacher, because that's how it was. Just as you stayed clear of your father, in the same way you stayed clear of your teachers. So Baap Khatra hai is something very well known to everyone. So he was a father figure. When I saw Ratish carrying his coffin, I thought this is, because I was watching it on cyberspace, I thought this is how it was for all of us. That he was in some senses there for us, he communicated it, yet there was an aloofness. So the very basis of our interactions were very minimal. I think he was always in a hurry, he was always going to some meeting, just as the elders did today. There was always something to do. He was coming from somewhere, going somewhere, and we would meet in the corridor. I would always be very happy to see him. He gave me my job. He gave my husband the ISSR fellowship. So obviously we were very grateful to him. These things happened, so it was not about anything, but the fact of his professionalism, the sense that he could mark out categories and make it very clear. So I know that when Professor Madan asked me at my interview, are you a mystic? I told him, that's for you to say. I was quite aghast by that question at my interview. I mean, where was it coming from? But I was astute enough to say I cannot alienate these people. And Professor Dipankar asked me, do you believe in phallic supremacy? And I said, I'm a Jungian. So when one goes to interviews, I think many of us, I was one of the lucky ones. I went to four interviews all my life, because finally there were places which were looking for people, so it happened, whether it was Brand House, Hindu College, JNU. But I know others who had to go through the enormous indignity of going to interview after interview. And Professor Oommen was totally non-judgmental. So he was there, I think, as the representative of the department, and the Dipankar was the chair. And academic life is not internecine warfare. It's continuous. There's never any break. But on the other hand, there's collegiality, friendship, affection, which transcends all of these. And once he told me that he never took offense to anything that Professor Yogendra might say or do, because Professor Yogendra Singh had hired him. So there were these two great characters. There was a third man, he was a saint. And that was Professor Venugopal. So these two people Professor Yogendra Singh and Professor Oommen, they did everything in a symbiotic way, but the department was divided like armies marching. There were 3 of us at that time, Maitrayee, Tiplut and myself. And we just could not fathom how we could negotiate between the 2 sides, the 2 phalanxes. And that was actually transcended by our age set, because we liked both our teachers. We liked Lodhi Singh and we liked TKU, and we were friendly and happy to be in the center. But the idea that armies marching is a continuous experience and we will never overcome it, and we must go on with the business of what Maitrayee said, institutional building. It meant that collegiality had to be there. It meant that in front of our students, we could not represent the factualism, the warriorhood, the ways in which people represent their perspectives in very, very vivid ways. And I think Mrs. Oommen was a very kind and gentle person who came to every faculty lunch, every faculty dinner, which was organized in honor of someone entering the system or retiring. Such a graceful person. Often men, academics, are like absentee landlords. And really, in terms of how the women support the system and the family is really of crucial emphasis. I think Vivek had said about the fact that Mrs. Oommen said that division of labor should be equal. And in some senses, that was the freedom of speech that she had. And she would always communicate what she felt and how she felt in very, very clear terms. Nobody was ever in any doubt about the wit and the intelligence and the beauty of that lady. So I think we're all here to provide support to the family. I cannot tell you how wonderful their sons have been in relationship to their father, how much he loved them, and the spaces set up in terms of the extended family, because I saw it in a very limited way. At the hospital, I was in town briefly, I happened to be there when he was out of ICU. And the tenacity of the family, who supported him through his entire working life, which was very long. And Professor Oommen was exactly as has been described. What kind of taxis did he travel in? What kind of roads did he travel in? What kind of dingy hotels and guest houses, university guest houses did he travel in? Same with Yogendra Singh. There was no capital class for them. They were with the people, of the people, and they did all that they could to make sociology present and valid in every small town, in every hinterland university, right up to the age of 84 or 85. So there's a lot to learn from that space itself, the kind of sacrifices the family made, and the ways in which Professor Oommen and Professor Yogendra Singh, because we always thought of them symbiotically, because the CSSS was made possible for so many decades, right up to COVID, only because of their tenacity and the way in which they could come every semester to give a talk. And I think that was important. I think we enjoyed that because we could see, as Maitrayee said, how much they had changed from the way that we met them as 20-year-olds and the way that we saw them perform. So adaptive, where Professor Yogendra Singh would say, you can survive only if you adapt. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm really grateful. Wonderful to see my colleagues again, and so happy that I could be here, just by chance.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a coincidence that she was here, and we have wished that whether she would send us a video message. We realized that she is here in person, and we are so lucky to have her to speak here. Professor in Jodhka.
Thank you, Tanveer, for organizing this and asking me to be here. I think, I mean, others have also talked about how in the last 1 year we have lost several thinkers, sociologists and other colleagues. I think Professor Nandu Ram's name has not been mentioned. I think that was also a very, very big loss. And then so Andre Bitte and Professor Oommen now, apart from that, I think last week we also lost Professor Panikar, a major historian. So obviously these are times, not that they have
died young, they have lived their life, they have made their contributions, and we are here partly because of them, the institutions they set up, they built. I was not a JNU student, so I don't have the kind of fear or kind of that image of Professor Oommen. I was his colleague very briefly. I mean, when I joined, he was there. He was also perhaps in my selection committee, I don't remember clearly. But then in a kind of year or so, his retirement came, and during that period, we did have some interaction. We went to his house, they came to our house, he and his wife and the dog. So, but otherwise, you know, I'm not really the right person to say much about him. About his personal life, only one thing that I would say, that even though he was perhaps one of the most published scholar in the department or even otherwise among the sociology community, what I remember is that he was never satisfied with himself. He always said that, you know, people don't really take me seriously. He wanted to do much more, and I think that's something which perhaps all of us, the spirit we should have, that there is a lot to learn, and that's what Maitrayee was saying, that he kept struggling and trying to find something new. And again, as Maitrayee was saying, he gave attention. He always was curious about what I was doing, and people told me that, yeah, so Oommen was inquiring about you. He was asking what has he published recently. He was kind of keeping track of every colleague, that, you know, what are we up to, even though, I mean, I was not close to him. I was not really directly engaging with his work. Very briefly, a few things that I would like to say. Again, Professor Khaka has already mentioned, we don't talk about his early work, which was very important work in some sense on land reforms, Vinoba Bhave's movement, Bhudanand movement, and how it was a failure. I remember that was one of the first things that I read on agrarian studies, and it was very interesting kind of qualitative empirical work, and he showed how the land that kind of, you know, people gave as daan was in the middle of a big plot of a big landlord, so it could never be allotted to anyone else. How it was, so he actually went and studied, and he had several papers on rural development, rural society, and various aspects of it. I think there's another important thing about both perhaps Professor Oommen as well as Professor Yogendra Singh, and to some extent also sociology at JNU, that at some level took sociology away from the earlier tradition of social anthropology. And people often compare Delhi School with JNU. Delhi School was largely embedded in social anthropological traditions, and people like Professor Oommen and Yogendra Singh and others, in some sense, tried to experiment with new things. And they were not really, in some sense, hesitant to kind of bring ideas from elsewhere. And in some sense, what Professor Mukherjee has said, or Professor Patnaik was saying earlier, they also did not immediately join the mainstream. They were not really worried about disagreeing with the historians, with the powerful Marxist thinking on the campus. And Professor Oommen, for example, the idea of ethnicity, you know, again, historians would talk only in the language of communalism, and his idea of nation and India not being a nation state, it's only a nation state, but not being a nation, it was a nation of nations, and these were very interesting ideas. And so he kind of, at some level, had the courage to raise questions which were of the time in a language which was again not the mainstream academic language of JNU. And so if you're confronting at various levels, and your colleagues are also saying that you know, this is not really the way you should talk about ethnic conflicts because it gives them legitimacy, and we as scholars, we should not do that. And these are discussions I have myself heard, not through Professor Oommen, but otherwise, you know, when one is talking about, you know, there were times when Punjab was in crisis, Northeast was in crisis, Hindutva had not really come up, but there were regular, you know, issues of nationalism, and there was a nationalist consensus in which left was also embedded, and they had the courage, Professor Oommen had the courage, not everyone perhaps had the courage to kind of stand on the margin and say things differently. And likewise, I think, you know, bringing categories from outside, bringing questions of history, and questions of identity, which again was not really something that sociologists talked about, and earlier mentioned question of social exclusions. And I think this is what perhaps may help people like Professor Oommen to kind of take sociology to also a platform of policy. And sociology was not something that was simply a question of trying to understand what was happening on ground and kind of being a critical observer, but it was also something that needed to be critically and actively engaged with, which was obviously JNU was doing quite a lot. Even people like M.N. Srinivas wanted to be on the planning commission, and they also consulted planning commission occasionally, but their sociology was always, or their anthropology or social anthropology was kept away from questions of policy. They would go and study the village or whatever they were looking at, caste in a different way. And so Oommen didn't hesitate even for a minute to jump into policy discussions, policy questions. Such a committee was obviously a very, very important contribution, and without, I think, a sociological lens, such a committee would not have become so critical and so significant as it became. So I think Professor Oommen has done his work, and now it's for the next generation, which was like also has been doing our work, but still I think the following generation has to take that further, and times are much more difficult. I think social sciences were much more comfortable when people like Professor Oommen came to sociology or to JNU. There was a lot of, in some sense, authority in position of professor. There was also a lot of money available. There were lots of students, colleagues also, and things are perhaps much more difficult today. And I think, but still, we need to pursue that we are basically critical thinkers, and we engage with empirical. We also say things which have policy implications. We talk about exclusions. We talk about inequalities, and all of us are interested in making India a good society or world a good society, and kind of giving some better space to humanity. Thank you so much.
Professor Nonghri. Professor Nonghri.
Thank you, Tanveer, for inviting me here to pay my tributes to Professor TKU. In the passing of Professor TKU, Indian sociology has lost one of its leading stalwarts, and the Center for the Study of Social Systems has really lost a very valuable member of the faculty. Despite the fact that Professor Oommen had retired many years ago, he was still very much part and parcel of the Center of the Study of Social Systems as emeritus professor. Unlike many of my colleagues who are here today, of course, Maitrayee has spoken about the fear that she felt of Professor Oommen, but nonetheless, I think she was very fortunate to have been in an institution where Professor Oommen was a teacher, even though she may not have been taught by him directly. So I was not so fortunate. I met Professor Oommen only in the year 1986, after I joined the faculty of the Center at the Study of Social Systems as an assistant professor. And by the time I joined the CSSS as assistant professor, Professor Oommen had attained a stature of very high eminence, so which was rather intimidating for a person like me, who comes from geographically and cultural periphery. You can imagine the kind of fear that I had of interacting with him directly. So I kept away from him for quite a while. But then the 16 years of service that I've had the opportunity to work together and teach together with Professor Oommen in the Center for the Study of Social Systems, I discovered a very different facet of his personality. I would like to say that I had also experienced few crises during that period in terms of health and other tragedies in the family. And of all my colleagues in the Center for the Social Systems, Professor Oommen was the sole colleague who made it a point to visit me at my house twice to ask me if I needed help. So that was the personality and the personal quality of a person of the stature of Professor Oommen, notwithstanding his intellectual prowess and scholastic achievements. But I also realized is just not his personal quality as such, but also a very clear reflection of his professional orientation, which is lays great stress on inclusivity, as well as also a direct engagement with the people with whom you work with or study with together. So that was Professor Oommen, the charisma of the man. And this belied the initial image that I had of Professor Oommen as someone that is, proud or authoritarian, but a very different person altogether. And I got to know Professor Oommen much closer, in fact, after he retired from the Center for Research Systems, when I was looking after the Center for the Northeast Studies program, where Professor Oommen at that time had joined as the Professor Emeritus, and he would come to the center, and I needed advice. So he was always very willing to give advice on anything that you seek, and also very friendly, always asking you, what are you up to? What are you working on? So that's the kind of person that he was. And it would be actually to say that Professor Oommen had really revolutionized sociology in India. For those of us who work on marginalized communities, his writings provided valuable insights, both on the theoretical and methodological plane. A staunch supporter of diversity and pluralism, many earlier speakers have emphasized that fact. So what I found with Professor Oommen was that his respect for diversity and pluralism also made him to be critical, of the kind of methodology that tended to be followed by scholars in the sociological department across the country, which tended to give more privilege to the top-down approach, which gave more privilege and importance to the perspectives of the dominant groups, to the perspective of state institutions, rather than looking at things from below. Such a perspective ended up obscuring the processes and structures of those who lie at the bottom of the ladder. So Professor Oommen was critical of this, and he made it a point to ensure that sociologists, in order to have a holistic understanding of the Indian social reality, they need not only to rely on the Western model and paradigms in their analysis, in their framework, but also try to develop indigenous ideas from the bottom, which will help them make better sense of social reality. And also he emphasizes the point that we need to look at the society from the perspective of the people on the ground, because that kind of perspective will give you a better understanding of the realities of Indian society. So the perspective from below helps to unravel the systems of inequality, the exclusions, and the marginalization of those who are not really in the dominant groups. So that was Professor Oommen in his studies. So for scholars like me, who work on marginalized communities, his perspective was extremely valuable and helped me also to make sense of many of the things that I study. So from the vantage point of Northeast India, a region which has been subjected and borne the major brunt of multiple forms of marginality, whether at the political level, cultural level, economic, or geography. Northeast India has been seen as a marginal society, a society that is peripheral to the larger Indian entity, that is India. It is an entity, it is a part of the country, a society which do not have very much in common with the majority of mainland Indian society. So Professor Oommen's concepts that he had developed in his study, concepts of neutralization of knowledge, giving equal importance to different systems of knowledge, not only textual knowledge, but also the knowledge which emanate from the ground. His ideas of inclusiveness, of inclusivity, his ideas of civic equality, these really help many of us who work on the Northeast to make sense of the problem, the complex problem, which otherwise remained invisible and really not very meaningful. But the concepts and the categories that he had crafted enabled scholars like me and many others to make use of those and apply them to the reality which we study, to see the relationship and the pattern which emerge from the ground. So what this meant that Northeast India, which initially had been a kind of an academic hinterland, more recently we see that Northeast India has been transformed into a vibrant site where theories are formulated and tested. That's, I think, we owe a lot to a person like Professor TKU, really, who brought about this kind of methodological shift in the discipline of sociology. And his perspective from below, the categories and concepts that he had developed, are not due to sociologists alone. In fact, I do not see much of a sociologist in Northeast India making use of these categories, but scholars from other disciplines, those particularly use the post-colonial framework. When I look at the writings, I see a very strong echo of the ideas that Professor Oommen really had developed. Now, on the institutional plane, I would say that Professor Oommen offers a bit institutional builder, and you see this very clearly in the happenings that take place in the center of the Israeli social system in the few years that I had the privilege of being together with him. Now, one of the things that had happened when I was that time really had to discuss the admissions of the students, the intake for the MA admissions. Now, Professor Oommen came up with a very novel idea, which really amazed me, that students from the reserve category who secured the same marks as those, at par, were students from the general category. Those students should be released from the reserve category and push upwards to the general category. So, because according to Professor Oommen, it makes more meaning to release these students from the slot and enable them to go up, which will help to improve social mobility. And this is beneficial not only for the students in the reserve category, but also for those in general category, because it opens up, it widens the circle of access to education. Education is a passport to success, and education is a very important tool of social empowerment, political empowerment, empowerment of various kinds. I think Professor Oommen realizes that. So by opening up a slot for the meritorious students from the reserve category, allowed them to move up into the upper category, the general category, and accordingly also increase the number of intakes for students from the general category also to match with the number of students who have been pushed up from the lower category. I think this is beneficial for everyone. So across the spectrum, whether it's general category students or those in the reserve category, they benefit very much from this. So we have a person of the stature and vision of Professor TKU who could see this, and I really found it, very, very good, at least from my own personal perspective. And what I also see this, that this is basically, I think, Professor TKU's perspective really in action. His idea of self-equality, is played out in this very kind of, this very policy they adopted with respect for admission to students. So this really goes to his credit, and I do hope that we still have the same policy now, because the admission policy now, it seems, has been centralized by the UGC or other institutions of learning, and I think centers and departments at the university level do not have much say to this. So it really freezes and narrows down the access of students to education. I think that would really be contrary to any kind of a policy that really aspires for empowerment of students across the spectrum. And also what I see in this particular policy adopted by Professor TKU was how he tried to balance merit with justice, recognition of individual merit. Those students are meritorious enough to have achieved marks at par with those at a higher level. Are given credit for what they have done, and also at the same time, you ensure that so that the general category students do not miss out. So according to the seats will also be given increase for them. So what I see in this kind of a policy that the Oommen was tempering justice with merit. The other little information, perhaps, which many of you may not know, those who are not part of the Center for Digital Systems, was that Professor Oommen, as an event institution builder, he was very concerned about the performance and the growth of the discipline, across generations. And I think credit goes to him because, as far as I know, he was the only teacher that I know of who had donated 100,000 rupees when he retired in the year 2002 to establish an endowment fund, the interest from which will be utilized to provide, confer a certificate of merit and cash award to the top from the MA class. I think such kind of action really, goes to show the kind of love that he has for scholarship, the kind of motivation that he really tries to, provide, for the younger students. So I'm very grateful that I had this opportunity to work with Professor Oommen for 16 years, during his teachingship at the Center for Digital Systems, and also to have interaction with him, after his retirement also. And the last time that I saw Professor Oommen giving a speech in a public forum was at the 47th All India Sociological Conference, which was held in Meghalaya in the year 2022. So Oommen was at that time 84 years of age. And the other day when we went to his house after he passed away, and we met his son, and I told him that, that I remember Professor TKU's speech, the keynote address which I presented on the foibles of Indian sociology, some suggestions for rectification. He spoke with such passion, and pointing out the institutional and intellectual weaknesses of sociology, and coming up, with suggestions of his own in order to improve the discipline. I think many of you would know that. I don't think I need to go to that. But what really struck me was that only a person who is truly full of conviction can speak with that kind of a passion, with that kind of a degree of commitment to it. And of course, knowing fully well that not everybody really would go along with some of the things that he said. But despite all that, so Oommen went ahead and gave his speech and came up with a list of suggestions of how to improve the discipline of sociology, to reach sociology to the larger section of the society, to produce sociology which is grounded in the theories and concepts that are digitally developed, that spring from the ground, to come up with theories that are innovative, and also to make sociology more relevant. I mean, many of the speakers have spoken about Oommen's eagerness to ensure that we do not confine our research to the universities or to the halls of conferences and seminars, but also ensure that we engage with public issues which are linked to policy and also underlined and informed by ideas of justice. My wish is that, dear Professor, please do rest in peace, and we thank you for the legacy you have left us, and may it continue to be a source of inspiration and insights for generations of students to come. Thank you.
We thank all the speakers in this session, and we invite the last set of speakers. Now, this session is to be chaired by Professor Rajni Palriwala. Please come to the dais. Professor Vivek Kumar, Professor of Sociology at CSSS, also currently the Dean of the school. Professor Geetha Nambissan, also former professor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Arvinder Ansari, she is professor at Jamia, Department of Sociology, Jamia, and also currently the secretary of ISS, Indian Sociological Society. And Ravindra Karnena, assistant professor at Lady Shriram College. Come. So yeah, Professor Rajni Palriwala.
So I first want to express my appreciation for those who organized this meeting. Someone was saying, why not in JNU? And I thought, well, there should be one in JNU, but I think it's also appropriate that there is a meeting outside JNU, because he was much more than JNU.
There was one in JNU.
Yeah, so I wasn't informed, though I'd asked to be informed. So that's, I guess I went through a period of parting pangs when I left JNU, but maybe I shouldn't have gone through them. So anyway, thank you for inviting me. And actually, much of what I want to say, I think, has been elaborated much more by the earlier speakers. I have a few points which I would like to just put forward here, and I've taken the chair's prerogative to speak first. Of course, one's here to celebrate Professor Oommen's life and legacy. One's here to express our respects for him. And when I think about him, the first thing, especially when you look at the slideshow and all the books that he's written, to me he's the epitome of what another dear professor said. He said professors never retire. This was Professor JPS said it to me. Somebody was saying, oh, how is so-and-so to be introduced as a retired professor? He said, professors never retire. Because professors, and I think this was true of Professor Oommen, always love to speak, to be heard, to listen, to write, to read. I remember at one point when he was asked to come to the Department of Sociology to speak at a conference we were having at that time as part of our Golden Jubilee. He said, yeah, I'll speak, but I need all these books. And one of my colleagues had to get all those books to him so he could go through them and look through them. When I think of Professor Oommen also, for me it's essentially in two phases. One of those who were his students. I think I was maybe the third batch of the MA. I don't know, Geetha, you were the second batch, there was a previous batch, so I was the third batch. And I think the very first lecture in sociology which I heard, with the first course of the day, very difficult for me to get there, but I did, was Professor Oommen, teaching sociological thinkers. Durkheim, Weber, Marx. And as Maitrayee pointed out, very structured. It made us a little scared, but still very structured, and there would be this break he would take every so often. And he'd look around at us, and we weren't sure if he was looking at us to see if we were paying attention. And it was like, okay, sit up straight. You better make sure he thinks you're paying attention. Professor Oommen, as many people have already said, has been a pioneering sociologist. A pioneering sociologist in terms of Indian sociology and in terms of the social sciences. Which meant, so, that when I then joined the profession, I would be looking at him both as having been his student and as a very junior colleague, maybe dodging him at conferences, maybe going up to him. But when I try and put those two things together, there are certain themes which come to me. I was his direct student for only 2 years. And I'd say I'm direct, though I wasn't ever his his research student, because in that class, we were so few, and he would be looking at us. His direct student, I see many of his students who have subsequently gone on to be my colleagues across the University of Delhi. So his role as a teacher was clearly very critical. I remember going from Durkheim in the lecture room and then a tutorial. And we were supposed to have a discussion, and I was supposed to write a tutorial essay on Durkheim, division of labor. Young, headstrong, thinking we've already seen it all. We, of course, hadn't seen anything. But JNU at that time, it was the emergency years, 75 to 77. People would say that, oh, emergency, but it wasn't ferment, the university, even at that time. Political activity was subterranean. So we would be distributing leaflets, holding our hearts in our sort of chests, scared while we are doing it, and then going off to the classes as though everything was normal, and it was normal. And when I was listening to those lectures, I came from physics, okay? So people might think that from physics it's very easy, but for me they were very dense. I was having to listen to words rather than formulae. I was having to take that in. And it's at times I realize now from my own experience, but also the first class is Marx, Durkheim, first Durkheim, then Weber, then Marx. How often I think back and I think we forgot what it was like as students when we started teaching and realizing how we had to make things less dense. Not because Oommen was making them dense. He was not, and I'm sorry, I should say Professor Oommen, but as students, when I'm talking about him as a student, I will say Oommen, because that's how we talked about him at that time. We refer to all our teachers by their surnames, not like they do today by their first names. We were respectful enough to use their surnames.
Was Oommen his surname?
As far as we were concerned, TK wasn't a surname, okay?
Matthew's brother's name.
Yeah, but okay, anyway, we can discuss that later. The North Indian arrogance, North Indian lack of knowledge, whatever it is, the colonial training, the initials are never the surname. So, Oommen, we used Oommen as though it was his surname. Thank you, Surinder. I will not say Jodhka. Now, actually, since the news and then this meeting, many of my classmates and my batch have also been remembering him. And in one sense, I almost feel like I'm a representative of that batch, the 75-77 sociology batch. And they're all remembering his unique style of teaching. Marx, Durkheim, Weber, the text, taking us through the text, taking us through the approaches. But what I'd actually started talking about was this tutorial, division of labor. So I go there, present it, and then I go on, of course, to immediately jump into my critique of Durkheim. And my critique of Durkheim, essentially that, he was a functionalist who wished to maintain the social order, and he saw what was integral to capitalism as just a minor part of it. Professor Oommen listened to me, listened carefully, and said, okay. And then he pushed me to substantiate. I couldn't just say it. I had to substantiate. And I think that was a teaching which remained with me when I became a teacher. And I would insist that students, even though there was a text which it was very fashionable to thrash, if they were going to take it up, they first had to present the text in the terms of the writer. And they had to first give an internal critique before they took another vantage point. And I think that's something I learned from him. Now, like Maitrayee, Professor Oommen and I had different approaches. But what was important was that he did listen and respect, maybe occasionally make a remark which I, of course, would not be able to defend, and I'd feel a little ridiculed. But then I'd also feel, okay, now I have to go further. Actually, in JNU, I think in all our classes with all our teachers, other than why sing, we could argue. We would ask in the class and we would argue. And I think it was to do, of course, not just with CSSS, it was to do with the times, it was to do with what JNU was at that time. Because as I said, at the one hand, political action was not on, but the ferment was everywhere. We were constantly talking, discussing. And again, something which I learned there, and I would tell my students, I'd say, don't think you're going to get everything in the classroom. You're going to get it by going and sitting with your colleagues and talking to them and discussing with them. And then we would bring that back into the classroom, the tutorial, lecture. And of course, Professor Oommen would know that there's been this discussion. He would know from the way we are saying it that there's been this discussion outside and we are bringing it in. Fine. But now, substantiate what you want to say. So, I think a number of people have made this point. With Professor Oommen, you could differ. He would respect that you had that difference. He may have thought you were wrong. He would indicate it, but not in a way to completely shut you up. That did not happen. And of course, we were headstrong and young, and I think we needed somebody to push us to also learn to read. But I think what was also important was that in terms of those texts, in terms of those times, these are texts which are, and I'm focusing particularly on this course. This was a course which was macro-sociology, Durkheim, Weber, Marx. And at the same time, we needed that macro-sociology where a lot of the other sociology was micro. We needed those macro perspectives to think about the world we were in. And that is also something which one carried. Now, moving on to the other sort of theme through which arena in which I would know him, and I'll try, and I'm speaking longer than I thought I would, thanks to you, which was as not the lecturer, not the teacher, but a person who taught through his text, who taught through his writing, through his research. And I'm thinking of particularly two areas of his work. One is on social movements, and the other is what many people have mentioned, his work on state, civil society, minorities, and pluralism. And one thing I think which came through both of them in different ways was the importance of looking at social and political processes. The idea of the process came through. Now, his initial work was on the Bhudan movement, which was both a movement, a Gandhian movement, and a social reform movement. He went on to then do two texts on social movements. And I remember at that time, he called me up, made me come and meet him, and insisted, though I tried to get out of it, insisted that I did an article on the women's movement for that book. And I said, okay, I have this, but I don't have the script. He said, I will have it typed out and give it to you. And you better sit and write it. He refused to take an answer, no. And I think it was so important because he knew we didn't have the same approaches, but he wasn't trying to get people to write with the same approach. He was trying to cover various different movements, various different sectors. And those two volumes then, I think, was something which also helped me break a fallow period, and also brought in something again which was important in terms of the sociology. Now, when one looks at the many dimensions of what he's written and worked, one of the things is, and in my story, how he tried to push younger colleagues and push the boundaries of the discipline. And I think what was very important was that in Indian sociology, one of the speakers earlier mentioned this, there were these gaps in terms of looking at state, in terms of looking at civil society, the relationship between them, the minorities, and he was bringing those in. And those were writings I drew on, not for my research, but when I taught political sociology, when I taught the sociology of India. But when I put all these things together, I think two or three things stand out about Professor Oommen. His deep belief in democracy, in democratic modes of interaction, and in democratic rights, and his deep belief in a plural, diverse society, that it was good for the society, it was good for us, his belief and in secularism, and it was a belief not just, it was a belief as a citizen, and it was a belief in terms of the value he saw it as having in society and necessary for society. So I think one of the things which, if you're thinking about his life and legacy, which we think of, is how not only were these issues important, they are even more important today. The struggle for democracy, thinking about democracy in our work, the struggle for a plural society, thinking about how pluralism and the processes of democracy and pluralism can work. So I want to express my condolences to his family, to his friends, his colleagues, all his students, and say that with those condolences, of course, we have to think about the struggles ahead in terms of our discipline and in terms of our society.
So, I was supposed to Yes, I think so. Your scribble is not worse than my scribble.
I thought as a chair I should assign you some job actually.
I have to chair, the best thing I can do is say.
Yeah. So we have Professor Vivek Kumar. Everyone knows him, I don't need to introduce.
The chair, member of the dais, and of the dais, thank you so much for giving me at the outset. Let me pay my tributes, not only from the Center of the Study of Social System, but School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I pay my respect and tribute to my beloved teacher, Professor TKU. You know, I may be the last, say, batch of students who became a colleague to him, and there are 4 generations sitting in this room. The first generation had already spoken and gone. Second generation is here. Women would have been angry because you are maintaining a hierarchy. Because, you know, the elder generation did not know that how the continuity has been there, and what they have spoken exists not only with them, but it is with us also. So to be just being actually, you know, a little bit more woman-like style, that I just want to look at 5 aspects of woman with one-liners, you know. Yes, of course, as a human being, everybody has told Professor Oommen how jovial he was and how witty he was. The wit which we have actually, you know, experienced is that somebody came very late in the class, and Oommen in his own style said that you're too early for tomorrow's class. So, and somebody came, you know, after a very long time, you know, and he saw very clearly, you know, this is father's university. If you don't want to be in the class, you have to go to daughter's university. Father was strict. I'm talking about Indira Gandhi Open University. So, you know, both could not understand. You know, as I've already told you, that actually once we visited to his house, and he was telling me, Vivek, you know, I have done my homework very well, and you know, I've read my Durkheim also very well, and I've given division of labor in the home also. And Madam Oommen said that, yes, Vivek, tell your teacher that division of labor should be equal. It should not be unequal division of labor. You know how much I have to bear. So that was the wit part of it as human being, and I've told already. Second, as an organizational man, actually, you know, the way, as all my teachers have already said, but when we entered, actually, that the last period of his, you know, just he was not teaching, but of course he was coming to the faculty committees, and actually then he was also giving us anecdotes. And I asked, sir, what will be the best way to teach? He said, burn your finger and learn that fire burns. There is no shortcut actually that you can learn the teaching in a day. But when actually I asked him references, because I have a teaching methodology of social sciences, and you know, man, there is no references, then I asked him, sir, actually, can you give us some references? He said, okay, I'll give you. Then he gave me two very important. One was, of course, Ted Benton, The Philosophy of Three Sociologies. And second was also the Gideon Soberg and Roger Nett, A Methodology for Social Research. And that became I think my victims are here. Many of the students, they must be knowing that they became actually my prime reading, and still actually I carry on with them. The third aspect is, of course, the institution builder, as everybody has said. Now, man was talking about that the last fag end of his retirement, he donated 1 lakh of rupees. But if you read the line, what he was speaking, he said that, no, don't think that I'm a very rich person and I'm donating. I got 3 awards in sociology. Gore Award and actually VKRBR Award and Permanent Award. And I fixed deposited the money which I got there. And then in that fixed deposit, I added some to make it round figure of 1 lakh rupees. I want to donate this money to the center because I want to keep my association alive. Now, friends, actually for 22 years, we have carried this. Now that has been named as Professor TKU Oommen Award. So I think Sir will remain with us till the center remains. That is the promise which we have done to the younger generation and as well as actually generation which is going to come. The research part, the production of knowledge, as everybody is talking about, I am, of course, the person, I always feel that he had a very broad canvas to produce his knowledge from local to civilization. And local, when I look at how he talks about perspective from below. The theorization of perspective from below did not come in a day. Rather, you see the definition of Dalit. I think the sociological definition of Dalit, the 3 characteristics which he gives and differentiates tribal on the one hand, minority, proletariats and Dalits, they are different. I think that was an eye-opener for me to understand that how you can define the categories. That beginning and then, the conceptualization of nation, how you can conceptualize nation and, 7 ways to conceptualize nation. For the first time, I was reading nation equated with civilization, nation with composite culture, and a historian has gone. Otherwise, I think we would have definitely debated that how he is not actually shallow, that there is nothing, concrete characteristic to define a nation. And then he agrees that there are 2 very important characteristics to define nation, that is territory and language. If you have 2, you can definitely start beginning. And that's what the India as a project started. But the composite culture and then nation as religion as it was equated, and 3 religions were contesting, and how they have actually, the project has been completed. And then the little nations which were within, then how they were contesting. So there are 7 ways to conceptualize nation, but that he is saying that national sociology, what can be the subject matter. And it is here that I found that he was trying to argue about the functions of knowledge. 2 functions which he gives was very eye-opener for me also, that he says that yes, one of the function of the knowledge is to perpetuate hegemony or to create a status quo. But on the other hand, the function of knowledge is to create a equal society or equality and social justice also. So this way, how actually you can have the national curriculum, and then he looks to the Constitution of India, that yes, the value system which have been brought to the Constitution of India, they are multiple, but they are universal values where they have been debated, they have discussed, and therefore I think a good subject matter of national sociology can be equated with the value system within the Constitution of India. But he doesn't stop there. Then he went to produce his, continental knowledge as well, where he was actually keeping Europe as a center, and then he looks the New World, the Latin America or America, and then comes to Africa, and then to Asia, and how these four regions, they have created their subject matter in sociology. It is here that he starts differentiating with colonialism. Colonialism is not a monolithic whole. There are two types of colonialisms. One is replicative and another is retreatist. That how these actually nations, especially African and Asians, how they have only retreatist type of colonialism, though the first, the Latin America and America, they were having replicative colonialism. Friends, very gradually he starts talking about even the middle class. What is the nature of the middle class? Whether the French middle class and the Indian middle class are same, or they have a different epistemic basis. Now these are not only empirical data which he has produced, but that, as Madam was talking about substantiation, he substantiated his argument with theories, whether Durkheim was giving the totality of modernity or it has given only partial notion of modernity. Weber, with rationalism, is it total or it is partial? History making project of Marx, whether it is partial, total, or George Simmel's intrinsic value of the self. I think these have been substantiated with the process of globalization, and in that context, how he refutes the Western epistemic syndrome of binary, and then talks about that how displacement syndrome is writ large in the Western epistemology, or modernity will come and tradition will be displaced. That is not the right way to look at. And the book Alien Concept and South Asian Realities really gives us a lot of food for thought, that how indigenous knowledge system, not the way actually the traditional definition, and that's why he did not agree with the modern movements which are talked about, that how universal, and that argued that, oh, in India we already have those modern, new social movements as people are talking about from the West, but in India we are already having it. So in that sense, friends, that there are actually these four. The last, of course, have been talking about is the policy formulation as a human being, and therefore I think it was befitting for sociologist in JNU CSSS that with his consent, I think Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri will remember that we divided his production of knowledge in 5 categories. The first one was social movements, protest and change. The second one was the nation and nationality and citizenship. The third one was modernization and development, and fourth was professional and professionalization, and last was globalization. These are the 5 areas in which he has produced his knowledge. So these 5 ways, I think, are for us to remember, and this is from my side, because he has edited me. Of course, he has also actually given his blessing in a very different ways, and not only to me, but my wife also. So we are doubly blessed in that sense. So nice of you, sir. You are always with us. With these words, I finish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Vivek. And now we invite Professor Geetha Nambissan, former professor at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies in JNU. She was also a student of Professor Oommen.
Thank you. Friends, it's almost 7 o'clock, and I think you've heard so much about Professor Oommen, so I am just going to be very brief. Thank you, Tanveer, and other organizers for asking me to speak. Like some of those assembled here, I had the good fortune to be both Professor Oommen's student at CSSS and subsequently his colleague in JNU, though at a different center, Zakir Hussain Center. Ours was one of the earlier MA Sociology batches, 74-76. Our teachers were, many of them were well-known scholars, and they had built a vibrant academic space that was exciting for us, especially those new to sociology like me. Professor Oommen introduced us, as many have said, to sociological thinkers, and more than 5 decades ahead, we have a little socio group. We still remember the characteristic way in which he lectured, his expressions, his intonations, a cadence that was unique to him and has stayed with us, his students. In our group, many recalled his lectures, especially on Durkheim, whose name he pronounced Durkheim, if you remember, in his very unique way, Marx and Weber. In Peter Berger's words, it was an invitation to sociology, peppered with a sense of humor and a twinkle in his eyes, all of which made it very appealing. So in a sense, his voice still rings in our ears. I remember Professor Oommen as a thoughtful and reflective teacher, punctual, as many have said, regarding his lectures, taking pains to prepare them, as many have said, and asking that we engage with the discipline seriously. To his research scholars, he was a supervisor who insisted on rigor in theory and methodology, but democratic in dealings and a humane and caring mentor. Many former students in our batch look back with gratitude at the small and sometimes not so small acts of kindness that Professor Oommen showered on them. He was among those who shaped us, the next generation of teachers, and we imbibed much from him. When I joined JNU as a faculty member, it was with a sense of humility that I met Professor Oommen, a former student and now a colleague. But he immediately put me at ease, as he did not believe in hierarchies, as many have said, and that is something that has stayed with me when engaging with my own students. He was always there when one wanted to discuss academic issues. In fact, I showed him our advanced course in the sociology of education, and he was quite happy to see the thinkers that he had taught us were included. And since they had so much to say on education, especially Durkheim and Weber. His contributions to the sociology of education are important and insightful and nuanced. Education policy and practices, inclusive classrooms, diverse exclusions, language, and so on. The Sociological Committee report and his own writings on citizenship and cultural pluralism speak to us in different ways. I was also fortunate to be in Madrid for the 1990 conference of the International Sociological Association, in which Professor Oommen took on the mantle of the ISA president. Professor Panini, I remember, was also there. I recall that we were also proud that he had been given this much deserved honor to lead the ISA and that he was from JNU. His speech was visionary and the audience listened with rapt attention. As many have said, Professor Oommen was an institution builder, but we were there in JNU to see him doing so. I was particularly impressed seeing him as Dean conducting the Board of Studies in an exemplary and democratic manner. I remember that when faced with a very difficult problem when I was chairperson, I knew that Professor Oommen would have the advice and reassurance I wanted. He was generous with his time as always, listened, gave his response to my thoughts about the situation on hand and what to do, taking an institutional view that helped me a great deal. I would like to end by expressing on behalf of the MA Sociology class of 1974-76, since I've told them that I would do so, our deep condolences and profound sense of loss to Mrs. Josephine Oommen, Koshi, Johnny, and their children. We remember Professor Oommen as one of our finest teachers, and I add as a greatly respected, admired colleague who will be missed but not forgotten. Thank you.
May I invite Professor Surinder S.
Thank you, Tanvi. Respected Chair, colleagues on the dais, I stand before you on behalf of Jamia Millia Islamia and ISS to pay my homage to Professor TKU Oommen, as we have been listening to all his students, friends, and colleagues that, his scholarship, his personality was something which was so
impactful. And I also echo the same sentiments. I had never had a courage to speak to him in JNU. I was so scared because the aura he carried, and I had a very minimal interaction with him during my days in JNU. But yes, 2010 was a turning point in my life when we invited him for a seminar at Jamia Millia, that is Muslim Alienation in India. And when we approached to him, he not only kind of helped us to sharpen, to go through the concept note, also helped us to get the resource persons, and he was a keynote speaker. And from there onwards, my close interaction started with him. And I would also like to say that, express my gratitude to him when I was contesting for MC member. So you have to have a nomination by two scholars. And I thought of Professor Oommen, and I called him up. I said, sir, I want you to sign my application, my nomination form. And he traveled from Gurgaon to Jamia to sign that. I mean, that was such a, I have no words to express that. And my mentor, Professor Anand Kumar, had signed. So, the kind of the relationships he built with us was very important, and for me particularly, because I was doing research in minority studies, and his writings on pluralism were something which really impressed me. And we know that there are, very few sociologists in contemporary India have engaged with the complexities of plural societies as consistently as thoughtful as Professor Oommen, as we fondly call him. Over the years, he has a wide range of scholarship people have talked about, from social movements to political sociology, social transformation, social theory. Yet what makes his work particularly distinctive is that beneath this wide range of interests ran a consistent concern, the ethical and institutional foundations of plural society. At a time now when questions of ethnicity, minority rights, and national belonging continue to shape the political debates across the world, his body of work is not merely an intellectual exercise. It offers an important sociological lens through which the dilemmas of multicultural societies can be more carefully understood. And perhaps this is why his work continues to speak to us even today with remarkable clarity and relevance. The significance of his intellectual journey lies not only in its range but also in its distinctive sociological orientation. The analytical perspective that runs through his writings can best be described as pluralist, an approach that pays close attention to the historical diversity of societies and the ethical challenges of living together within them. Rather than aligning himself with any single theoretical camp, his scholarship sought to reconcile the universal and the particular, the indigenous and the global. In doing so, he opened new conceptual pathways for thinking about sociology of plural societies and the conditions necessary for democratic coexistence. At the center of Professor Oommen's sociological imagination lies a profound question, especially his late writings. How can culturally diverse societies sustain democratic coexistence? And his admiration for Jamia when he joined as a visiting professor was about the composite culture, the Dini Talim, and he would engage students with the question of diversity, identity, unity in diversity, and he would often, he was very particular and meticulously listening to the students. And friends, in Board of Studies, we always look for students who are very, rigorous with methodology. And at times he will pick up a student who is weak, who could not express. And if we had little reluctance to take that student, he would say that as a teacher, you should know how to craft, skill of crafting. So, he was a savior for many students till the time he was on our Board of Studies. So, I was also particularly, impressed by his work on Gujarat, the post-Godhra rights. He was also on the committee, as many of us know, on Gujarat Harmony Project. Yeah, Gujarat Harmony Project. And the way, in this book on Godhra, he talks about the interventions right from youth, women, neighborhood. That is amazing. And I think that perspective to engage with communal violence is something where he talked about, he emphasized about dialogue. I feel is very strong, and what we have got engaged is kind of always talking about contestation. Here he was giving us a model, a formula of reconciliation, of cooperation, of how we could address these questions of conflict. So his intellectual orientation has shaped many of his students, and generations of students like me will remember a scholar who emphasized intellectual clarity and the importance of articulating sociological arguments with precision. His classrooms were spaces where ideas were rigorously debated and where students were encouraged to develop the confidence to present their thoughts clearly and critically. Beyond classroom, his engagement with professional sociological institutions helped strengthening the discipline both nationally and internationally. Many of us, we have spoken about it. His association with Indian Sociological Society, where he served in important leadership capacities, including as its president, reflected a long-standing commitment to nurturing institution spaces for sociological dialogue in India. And yes, Indian Sociological Society owes a special thank to his foresightedness for his vision. Professor Maitrayee pointed out the current office where we are located is his vision and contribution and commitment to the discipline. At the global level, the engagement with the international sociological community expanded the reach of Indian sociology. As the president of International Sociological Association, he played a crucial role in placing Indian sociology firmly within the global sociological conversation. Through these engagements, his influence extended beyond scholarship to shaping the institutional life of the discipline in India. His leadership exemplified scholarly excellence combined with institutional vision. As all of us know, and yet many of us have mentioned that his his presence in these two committees, which were very significant, such a committee, where he chaired the advisory committee, and he was also in the Gujarat Harmony Project. Interestingly, when he came to, Jamia, he was very much interested to understand. He said that we need more studies, autoethnographical studies, his interaction with the mechanics, these young boys who were getting into these, small jobs, and he would say that we have to look at the reasons why are they getting there. Though in such a committee, he has talked in detail about the discrimination which they faced. So I would like to conclude and say that Indian Sociological Society remains profoundly indebted to him for his visionary leadership. At a critical juncture in its history, his foresight and commitment to institutionalizing the society helped to stabilize it during difficult times. Today, as we gather here to remember him, we are reminded that his legacy lies not only in the books he wrote or the institutions he helped to build, but also in the intellectual courage with which he defended the values of pluralism, dialogue, and democratic coexistence. On behalf of Indian Sociological Society, I thank his contribution, his for strengthening ISS, and I'm sure his intellectual legacy will continue to inspire generations committed to rigorous scholarship and the pursuit of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ravindra. Our last speaker is Ravindra Karnana. He teaches sociology at Lady Shri Ram College.
Teachers and friends, I'll be very brief, and I got a written script of 1 page, so which means that that will help me to say it for the next 10 minutes or so. 5 minutes, yes. there is a lot that would be said about the substantive sociology of Professor Oommen in the years to come. It's a legacy that we are going to visit over and again in the years to come, and that is first thing that we need to understand about that legacy, because there are legacies in Telugu we say Pubbalo putti makkalo maadipoyindi. It is not that kind of a legacy. It is a legacy that we are going to draw on for a long time. Pubba and Makha are tithis. They are very close to each other. So the point is that something that is born in Pubba will basically die in Makha. It is not that kind of a legacy. Something that is short-lived, ephemeral. It is not that. It is an enduring legacy. That is the meaning of it. We can confidently say that the body of work that he left for us is going to grow in its importance, its relevance, and its significance in the years to come. It is not something that is going to, that has this kind of a radioactive decay quality to it, right? For now, what I'm going to say is this, that there are 2 or 3 ways in which he influenced me as a teacher. That is the vocation that I have chosen for me. So those 3 things I will mention, and that is what I want to dwell on. The first thing was this inspiring and very inspired moment that I had with him when I went and met him, largely to thank him immediately after my MPhil admission. There was a senior student in the chambers, and the student, they were having a conversation. I was waiting for my turn to have a conversation with him. And the student was asking, he asked him this question, very probing question. He said that, is it worth all the 500, 600 crores that we are spending on JNU if the dropout rates are what they are? And without batting an eyelid, he said one thing to him, and it stayed with me for the rest of my life. He said that even if it makes a transformative difference to one student who basically took admission in JNU, that 500 crores is worth it. What basically that statement, of course, as a policy maker, he would understand that one needs to be efficient with these public resources. But what it basically tells us the spirit which he embodied, what he believed in, what is at the core of his profession, what is at the core of him as a professional, sociology professional, and a public intellectual. What it basically tells us is that universities are transformative spaces. In a society like ours, creating, nurturing universities and other spaces of transformation is an act of sustainable transgression. The idea is that transformation and transgression are not 2 different things. They are it has to be a university, a space like university is a sustainable transgression. So we cannot critique him for not being radical enough. The very act of sustaining a space like that is a transformative act and a transgressive act. So if you are a Marxist, or if you are somebody who basically want to think of it as a permanent revolution, think about it like that. But he was that. That is something that basically stayed with me for the rest of my life. And every day I go into class, this is what I remember. That we need to create a sustainable space in terms of an educational institution. The second thing is, I think for him, sociology cannot be left as a kind of a strange transplant in this kind of intellectual landscape that we have created in this country. And he knows that if so long as then it becomes a kind of a plastic flower. We need to make it organic and organically take root in this soil. And that had been his lifelong project. And so long as it remains so, as a kind of a inorganic transplant, it always remains a precarious intellectual enterprise as such. So, sociology has to become a kind of a self-assured practice with organic roots in this society. That has been his quest, and that has been something that basically was at the foundations of his intellectual endeavor as far as I can see. So, this process of rendering sociology organic, at the same time, it cannot be searched for some kind of a cultural essence. For him, the process of this taking root, organic taking root of sociology has to be intrinsically connected to democratizing knowledge and producing a democratic knowledge. So the process of democratizing knowledge and democratic knowledge is something that is integral to Professor Oommen, and that is something that all of us basically, it's not, I'm not speaking for a whole lot of students here, I'm sure, that all of us carried with us as we went along. So it's a quest of a larger project of democratization of knowledge, and he thought that one of the ways we can accomplish it is to professionalize sociology. There's a short piece that he wrote for a seminar in early 2000s in Situating Sociology, where he talks about the problems of professionalization of sociology. He wrote about doctors and lawyers and various other professions, but that piece is extremely significant. The third thing basically that I took from him and that made a lot of sense for that makes a lot of sense for us is that to be a cosmopolitan in our times need not be an act of erasure. You don't need to leave behind any markers that you may carry as a part of your biography in order to become a cosmopolitan. In fact, one of the things I often used to joke with my friends is that he spent most of his life outside Kerala, but all that it takes is one word from his mouth to figure that he is a Malayali. You don't really need to erase anything in order to become cosmopolitan. That is something that has a deep. It's very enabling for all of us who come from various places in JNU to be able to encounter a person who basically can be that very rooted cosmopolitan person. All right. It has to be an act of embodiment of plurality. It has to be an act of. The mere act of presence is an assertion, and that is what basically his presence taught to us. It never took. As I told you, like this meant a great deal for so those of us who are trying to come here and find and lay roots in this city and be part of something which has a kind of an intellectual endeavor which looked what should we say? It looked like another world, but with him that was possible. The last thing that I would like to say is that. What in Telugu we call Purna Jeevitam. In English, it somewhat becomes emaciated. It basically is he led a full life, but more importantly, he led a consequential life. All right, and my sense is that he will continue to have these consequences for a long time, and these consequences are both institutional as well as intellectual. All right. My sense is this, that he left us the legacy that he left us in our times, basically, for our times is this. He left us with a charter, he left us with a map and a blueprint to carry out an act of reconstruction whenever we basically get out of the morass in which we are caught right now. That is what basically makes it vital. In long run, basically, whenever we are getting out of this quagmire, I don't know when that is going to happen. Maybe it will happen in our lifetimes, maybe at some other point. But here is a person whose work basically is going to be of indispensable consequence when we really want to reconstruct this society in ways that he always cherished. Thank you.
So, yeah, or this is the last session, so we will continue sitting as well. We have got a lot of video messages from people across the country as well as from outside of the country. We don't have time to screen them. So what we plan to do is that we'll bring out a YouTube, and upload it on the YouTube, the entire recording of this session, and these video messages will also be included there. I just read out the names of people who have sent these video messages. Professor Anthony Palakal, Professor of Sociology, University of Calicut? Kerala. He has sent his video message, retired now. Professor G. Nagaraju, Head of the Department of Sociology at University of Hyderabad. Professor Rajni Mukherjee, who was formerly his student, but now a Professor of Sociology and Social Anthropology at University of Durham. Professor Shurita Saha, who was also his student, and now a Professor and Head of Department of Sociology at Presidency University, Kolkata. Professor Rajesh Mishra, professor of sociology, former professor of sociology at University of Lucknow. He was also the dean of the School of Social Sciences. Professor Azra Abidi has sent a written message. She's the head of the Department of Sociology at Jamia Millia Islamia. And we also have messages from Professor Jeffrey Players, who is the president of the International Sociological Association, and Professor M.N. Panini. Out of these, we'll just read out two from message from M.N. Panini and another one from Jeffrey Players. They're very brief. I invite Dr. Geetha B to read Professor M.N. Panini's message.
Professor Panini writes this. I first met Tharailath Koshi Oommen in 1972 when I was appointed as a lecturer in the Center for the Study of Social Systems, JNU. Oommen had just then published his book on Bhudan movement in Rajasthan, which proved to be a sequel to his long list of publications in the form of articles and books that came out of his pen with great regularity. When I joined JNU, he had already acquired a big reputation as a dedicated teacher and as a good and fair-minded administrator. Besides, he was also emerging as an academic star who was quoted by organizers of seminars and conferences all over India. It was my good fortune that I got to interact with him as his colleague almost daily. Later, I also collaborated with him in a research project sponsored by the ILO and worked with him in tandem as the first managing editor to rescue the Sociological Bulletin, the journal of the Indian Sociological Society. At that time, the journal as well as the society was going through a vicious cycle of problems emanating from lack of funds, irregular and delayed publication of the journal, and paucity of papers and articles of good quality to reflect the high standards set by the stalwarts who had set up and nurtured the professional body. If today the Indian Sociological Society is sound financially and if its journal has acquired an international prestige, it is because of Oommen's commitment and high professional standards. Oommen was a multitasker. Sociologists are familiar with him as a prolific author, but he was no prima donna who regarded administrative responsibilities and institutional commitment as at most a necessary evil to endure. Right from the time of my acquaintance with him, I got to appreciate his deep commitment to JNU and to his profession. As the Secretary General of the World Congress of Sociology that the Indian Sociological Society hosted in Delhi in 1986, he astounded the global academic community with his excellent organizational skills and ensured its success despite the fact that some of his colleagues tried to disrupt its proceedings by raising a false flag issue of inviting supporters of apartheid to the conference. I was close at hand watching him work with great enthusiasm and inspiring his colleagues to go the extra mile to ensure the success of the international conference. This conference hurtled him into the vortex of global sociology, and he acquired numerous admirers from among distinguished scholars worldwide. No wonder he was the first Indian and an Asian to be elected to the prestigious post of the President of the International Sociological Association. Oommen's other lasting contribution was to the Prime Minister's high-powered Committee on the Social, Economic and Educational Status of the Muslim Community in India, which is popularly known after its chairman as the Xacha Committee. This popular nomenclature does injustice to Oommen because it glosses over his dedicated effort right from the stage of designing the data frame and the data that is required from the government, data analysis, to the stage of the drafting of the final report. The report was truly the result of teamwork, but I was at close hand witnessing his struggles to overcome problems that he had to encounter at various stages. As his colleague, I can point to the typical Oommen's turns of phrases and vocabulary with which the report is replete. More than anything, Oommen was a close friend. I treasure the fact that he did me the honor of making me a member of a charitable trust that his family had created. That bond continues. I am touched and overwhelmed with affection that Josephine Oommen and her sons Koshi and Johnny have showered on me and my family all along. To say that I miss him is an understatement. Professor M.N. Panini.
Dr. Manisha said you will read the message from Jeffrey Players.
This is a highly abridged version of the longer letter that he sent. TKU Oommen passed away on February 26. One of the main figures of Indian sociology over the past 60 years, Oommen made major contributions to Indian and international sociology. He will remain one of the most influential presidents of the International Sociological Association. He served as Secretary General of the 1986 World Congress of Sociology in New Delhi. He was elected ISA president 4 years later, the second ISA president from the Global South and the first from India and Asia. Becoming ISA president at a pivotal moment, as a new era of globalization opened with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, TK Oommen contributed to shaping the concept and practices of global sociology that lie at the core of ISA. At a time when globalization and the internationalization of sociology were at the core of sociological conversations of the ISA, he insisted on three main problems of the dominant Western-centric vision of international sociology: the denial of colonialism, sociology as an endemically national-based discipline, and a process of internationalization that too often amounted to the westernization of sociology. Oommen pointed to the invisibilization of colonialism as the great denial that thwarted the natural development of sociology as a discipline in the colonies and limited the relevance of the discipline in post-colonial and diverse societies. This denial also prevented sociology from becoming truly global. Following the same line, Oommen strongly argued against the irrational division between sociology and social and cultural anthropology. Overcoming this division was not merely a matter of disciplinary boundaries, but of addressing one of the core biases in sociology and in dominant visions of development. To insist that sociology is an offspring of modernity subjects non-modern societies to cognitive blackout and ignores multiple modernities. Oommen also challenged methodological nationalism, although the concept itself was not widely diffused at the time and is not explicitly used in his writings. As he stated in his article in Global Dialogue, linking sociology with the nation-state goes against the very grain of the discipline. Sociology analyzes social structures and cultural patterns in all varieties of societies. If sociology has a disciplinary interest in diversity, the nation-state relentlessly pursues the goal of homogenization. Paradoxically, the souls of sociology and the nation-state pull in opposite directions, but they are chained together in one body, that of the body politic, which impedes sociology's internationalization. Among his most significant contributions was his unwavering alert that the internationalization of sociology too often becomes synonymous with westernization. What passes for internationalization now is largely the routine application of Western knowledge to apprehend non-Western reality. Oommen argued that an authentic internationalization of sociology should pursue both commonalities and specificities of societies. Since the early 1960s, Oommen raised awareness of the global imbalance in the production of social sciences and contributed to the academic dependency theory. Oommen was a tireless promoter of contributions of Indian and global South sociology. As president of ISA, he promoted research on movements, citizenship, and democracy in the global South, and encouraged comparative work across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. He championed the idea of a global dialogue in which India and countries of the global South would play a central and equal role. The ISA and global sociology more broadly would not be what it is today without TK Oommen. His intellectual and institutional leadership helped shape the trajectory of the association for decades. As I said, this is only part of the very longer piece that he's written. Thank you.
Well, it is, this evening which we come together to celebrate the life and legacy of Professor Oommen. It was, it's a collective effort of many people coming together. Students of Professor Oommen, all of us are more or less sitting here. There are some who are could not be here. They are either online, they've been contributing in various ways by being where they are, like Professor Dr. Thirunavakarasu in Hyderabad, Shrita Saha in Kolkata, and many others. So I invite Dr. Ratish Kumar for the vote of thanks.
It's gone. Yeah.
Before I share the vote of thanks with all of you, just a one-liner, because there was a mention of Professor Oommen's name and the kind of discourses that could follow that. And in fact, Professor Panini's message clearly mentions his name fully. That is Professor Tarailath Koshi Oommen. In fact, Tarailath is the family name, and once Oommen Oommen has written about his name in one of his books, the autobiographical, which he wrote, Trials. So in which he mentioned that somebody, when he was abroad, called me Professor Tara. So the Malayalis will laugh, I know. This Tara literally means that, or metaphorically means a person good for nothing or a stupid. So, Oommen said that person that you are literally abusing me in my own language. And, that is the way in which he can make, us laugh by taking his own name. So with this great respect, tribute to Professor Oommen for leaving us to think further through his thoughts and ideas, I take this opportunity to thank all of you. In fact, I was asking Tanvi, there's no organizing committee as such, because we are all his former student. I was not a student of him, but you all came together as well-wishers, colleagues, friends. So I would like to thank, first of all, the India Islamic Centre for providing us the space and facilities, especially the President, former Union Minister, Salman Khurshid, also to chair this event. And a special mention to Mr. Iqbal Ahmed, the senior journalist, BBC India. All distinguished professors, Professor Oommen's contemporaries, students who later became professors of JNU, Delhi University, Jamia Millia, and all other universities and institutions in Delhi and other parts of India and abroad. Also, scholars who shared with us their messages through videos and texts from different parts of the country and otherwise. And most importantly, we would like to thank the family, especially Ma'am Josephine and his sons, both Koshi and Johnny were very keen on attending this event online. And they were also asking for us to share the link in advance for the live streaming, so that Professor Oommen's relatives from different parts of the world and also from his own village, Venmani, he can also watch this event live. And we thank all of them for being with us in this moment, and also to all of you taking your time to be here for this more than 3 hours now. Yeah. And a special thanks to Samim for facilitating with this live streaming. I think that's all. Thank you. And do we have chai outside? Yes. Yeah. Please join us for a cup of tea and snacks.
Sorry, yeah. So, as the last, we observe a moment of silence in memory of and as a tribute to not only Professor Oommen, but also many of generation of scholars in the recent time have left us. I particularly, we remember Professor Oommen, Professor Becker, Professor Panika, and others. Thank you.
All those speeches will be uploaded by the next evening. By the next evening, all will be available on YouTube.
Okay, so this is the assurance from Shamir. By tomorrow evening, all this, the entire proceeding here will be uploaded on the YouTube. We'll share the link as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, it went on. But people were so, I felt that they were all so engrossed. Occasions like this, we are difficult to
I myself take it to me. I thought I'd speak for.
नहीं बनी ये काम कर रहा है कि नहीं